Hi, I'm Sofia Patel. I'm an analyst at the Counterterrorism Policy Centre at ASPI. I'm here today with Dr Tobias Feakin, Director of National Security Programmes at the Institute. We're going to talk about Britain's historic decision to remove itself from the European Union last week. International policymakers have been asking questions about the political, economic and security implications. We, being in Australia, would like to sort of focus it to sort of the regional impact of Britain's decision to leave the EU. So, Toby, let's start with the economic implications and issues at bay. How do you see the immediate future of a post-Brexit Britain economically?
In one word, depressing. And why I say that is the fact that what was being warned about prior to the referendum is now taking place. And what am I talking about? An immediate devaluation of pound sterling to points of currency trading that we haven't seen since the early 1980s, when the UK was perhaps only just coming out of the large recessions of the 1970s. Conceivably, you can see the pound still dropping even further as markets are feeling very insecure about what the UK's future might actually pose. We're seeing, again, another one of the warnings was about the financial sector, which of course many people have misgivings about because of the 2008 global crisis and crash. But needless to say, the UK economy is heavily bound to international banks that are trading in London and are firmly entrenched in the EU financial markets. Now, we've already seen that literally after the initial decision being made, they had begun to enact plans to uproot their operations and take them to Dublin, Paris and Frankfurt, which is something that they've had in their minds should this happen for a long time. So what we're seeing essentially is economic turbulence, which I would predict for the next 5 or 10 years you'll see a UK that is dipping in and out of recession and struggling to find exactly where its economy is actually going to.
So the economic liberation that was promised by the Brexiteers in their campaign is, it's a sort of a long-term process to get there. And do you think we can get there to sort of, we now have removed ourselves from the red tape of Brussels bureaucracy. So there must be some sort of positives in that, despite the immediate damages.
Well, there has to be. I mean, out of great conflict and crisis often comes great moments of clarity and creativity. So don't discount the fact that actually during a financial squeeze like this, there won't be some imaginative business models and ideas that will emerge as a consequence. And absolutely, there might be shekels that are taken off, but they won't recover the UK economy very, very quickly. It's a long-term process. Markets look for stability to make sure that investors are comfortable and confident. And what we've seen is a complete lack of political clarity about what the plan might be. In fact, some might ask the question, is there a plan? As to the referendum failing and the UK voting out, there doesn't appear to be a plan. Those that championed it are pulling themselves away and retracting from financial statements they made, from statements around immigration, and we're now left in a time of political flux in the UK, which means that markets are uncomfortable in their investments there. So I think you're looking at least 5 years down the line. So if Article 50 is actually taken forward and enacted, then there is then a protracted 2-year discussion on what those terms and disengagement take. Don't think for an instant that the European Union will make that easy or not financially costly for the UK. So that means 2 years, then you will find out what the beginnings of those results will be. So conceivably another 3 years of the result of that divorce to really take shape. So I think you're looking at maybe post 5 years, then you could see the beginnings of a serious bump in the UK economy if long-term planning has been put in place very, very quickly in the coming months.
That takes us nicely to the second issue, which is the political impact of Brexit. Well, as you've rightly pointed out, there's no plan. We currently have no government and no shadow government either. So post-Brexit, Britain immediately is in utter turmoil and distress. But looking forward to a hopefully more stable environment, what do you think this means for diplomacy, foreign policy, What is Britain's role now going to be independently from the EU? Will that change with regards to its relations with Australia, with other international communities other Commonwealth countries? What also are does Australia see this? On the other way, has this had an impact on domestic politics? Will it impact the way people vote tomorrow in the election here? Some comments on that?
That's a great question, because I think what you saw was the current Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull come out very strongly the day after the referendum had been completed, and made very strong statements off the back of that, chiming very strongly with his messages of economic stability of government, growth in jobs, trying to really play off the back of the uncertainty that Brexit had caused the UK and the European markets. So if anything, I may well be wrong, often we all are when we try and predict political events, but I think it may have strengthened Turnbull's hand somewhat in the election that will take place tomorrow. In terms of the impact on Australian relations, some have said that it will actually lead to the UK retracting from some of these relationships it has. I think it's going to lean far more heavily now on its traditional historical partners. Certainly through the Five Eyes arrangement, it will look ever more to the US, to Australia, New Zealand, Canada, to increase trade links, and increasingly look to Commonwealth partners as well, because now it doesn't have that single market in the EU to play into. It's going to be desperately seeking other partners. That's a favourable position for Australia to be in. It strengthens Australia's hands, and it gives Australia a real opportunity to reshape the UK relationship, which I don't think is quite at its maximised potential, let's say, as it stands. Politically in the UK, the problem now is something that we're seeing, I think, more broadly in Europe, the US, more divisive politics are taking place within parties. You don't see that there's a single position. Of course, behind closed doors that's the case, but it's rare that you would see, as we did during the build-up in Brexit, that members of the same party directly arguing against one another on television. It doesn't show unity, and I think one of the consequences that people haven't spoken about here is I feel it's unavoidable that at some point an election is going to have to be called way before the end of this term of this government. How can they conceivably stay in government when they're clearly completely split on the decision that's taken place? A new leader's being put in place. I think the public will demand that a general election is called, so that that longer term planning can actually take place on the basis of a party or a group of individuals who actually have a clue, to be honest, of what the direction of travel is going to be.
Yeah, I mean, clearly, I think you're right. I think that the referendum is a result of exercising democracy, and if the government that's in place doesn't represent almost half of the public's views and opinions on this, it's their right to call up. The UK keeps going on about looking to Australia for lots of different things. So they reference Australia's immigration policy, they reference Australia's healthcare system, these kinds of things. Perhaps even domestically in the UK, we might even be moving more towards how domestic politics it runs in Australia rather than the other way around. Do you think that might be a case or not?
Well, I mean, there's a possibility when searching for answers to, what responding to the referendum, what does that look like from a UK government perspective, that they will look abroad to other policies which they think might address those. And yes, there's been a discussion about Australian immigration policies, the point scoring system that Australia follows as being something that could be implemented in the UK setting. And so that's conceivable, yes, that they could lean on Australian partners to understand how their immigration system works and how they can implement that quickly, which in many respects is a bit of a reversal.
Yeah.
And that's what I mean when I think that Australia is actually in a far stronger position with the UK now in terms of not dictating but negotiating the terms of conditions of future relationships and what they look like. Yeah. And I don't think Australia should be frightened of that. I think it should absolutely look to benefit in its trading relationship with the UK and the relative weakness of the pound, which I think will continue to grow weaker. So it's a fairly Machiavellian thing to say, but I think it could benefit Australia in the medium to long term. Yeah,
no, I think you're probably right there. And finally, you mentioned the Five Eyes relationship, the security implications of Brexit on the international community. Well, the security implications of Brexit for Europe are dire, in my opinion. But Britain will largely remain unaffected, probably, with its robust security structures and expertise in that field, as their relationship with the Five Eyes community probably won't change. I mean, would you suggest that that's a sort of a right way to interpret it?
I think you're absolutely right. Five Eyes relationship will always be the bedrock of UK security arrangements, certainly, especially on intelligence and defence issues. I think one of the single biggest losers from a security perspective is Europe as a whole. The UK is often seen as one of the key partners and contributors to certainly broader security discussions and practical approaches within the European Union. And certainly in terms of intelligence sharing, the UK has been very forward-leaning in trying to assist legislation move through the European parliaments. If you look back through the 2000s and certainly all of the legislation that was brought into counter-terrorism, a lot of it was borrowed from UK legislation that was passing through, and the UK was pivotal in pushing that through. So from my view, I think with the European Union currently suffering increasing numbers of terrorist attacks within its shores, losing the UK conceivably as a core intelligence partner is very, very dangerous. But then I think the threat will outweigh the losses from an institutional point of view. I guess the broader issue of defence relationships, that's concerning because you have this individual called Vladimir Putin who has constantly looked to destabilise the European Union model. For him, that he doesn't like unity because that means he cannot manipulate. Absolutely, it's good for him that the UK has come out and gives him ever more leverage around the margins to increase his power base. So from a European defence perspective, yes, hugely dangerous. Unsettling in NATO to a degree, but then NATO is more than the European Union. But there's no doubting that it will still have rippling effects within NATO as well.
Right, but NATO is withdrawing from Europe. It's leaving Europe to be more dependent on itself. And then the US is pushing back and it's increasing its presence in Asia and the Pacific. So with that in mind, what is Australia's position, and what can Australia do to perhaps mediate the situation, if anything? Can Australia, with its stronger presence with the UK, with its stronger potential partnerships, and it's also very strong security and defence abilities, can they sort of assist Europe in any way to mediate any and mitigate the impact of this?
I think it's going to be tough for Australia to play a very practical defence role in terms of troop contributions, if you like, to that part of the world. It's not really part of Australia's defence relationship with Europe in that sense. Potentially, as Australia is an honest broker, yes, I could see a role there. I think in terms of the danger of what's happened here with the UK being removed or potentially removed from the European Union is the fact that, yes, the US has tried to withdraw itself physically from those eastern flanks, but those eastern flanks are becoming ever warmer, if you like, from Putin's pressure. And as Eastern European countries demand and ask for more troops to be put on the ground, the US has responded to a degree, but you're absolutely right, it's looking to European partners to reinforce its former contributions. And without the UK there, without the UK, who is one of its most prominent allies, then that is going to be considerably tough. And I'll return to the point that Putin will see that and he'll look to exploit it. I'm not concerned that Putin's suddenly going to invade Eastern Europe, but certainly he will look to turn the screw on energy flows through into Eastern Europe and around the margins influence ever more if he sees a weakened European Union. And to me, that's very dangerous, because then that pulls the US away from its Asia-Pacific rebalance, if you will, and back into Europe, which again means that we've got shifting strategic patterns. China becomes ever more influential, which it inevitably will, but that means that the US becomes increasingly confused in where its prioritization is actually going to have to lie. So there are long-term strategic impacts of UK's removal far beyond what was ever made clear to the UK public.
And so is the responsibility now on the UK to really work towards creating these new bilateral relations with the various countries that are now left vulnerable in Europe in particular, to strengthen their security relationships, to sort of avoid this, to avoid the potential exploiting from Russia and Putin's sort of wrath. How can Britain push forward to mitigating the effects of this?
The first thing it needs to do is to reassure traditional partners that it's not completely evaporated from the international setting, because that's what you might assume from what you see in the media. That won't be true. There needs to be a process of reassurance. But the second thing that needs to happen before any kinds of decisions can be made is that another thing that needs to be reviewed is the Strategic Defence and Security Review, because currently as it stands, it's a document without basis in terms of the element of European security issues, because that has completely shifted now with the result of a referendum, and especially if Article 50 is then enacted. So we have to go through a whole shift in what does this mean for our armed forces, for our broader security apparatus, and then that needs to be communicated to partners further than just that initial reinsurance. And that is going to take time. And that time lapse means that strategic shifts can begin to take place around the margins before, the UK has a chance to really conceptualise and communicate that.
Yeah, that time frame is clearly incredibly important in order to get it right, but also in the short term, especially in this current security climate that we're in, of heightened tension with international terrorism, the migration crisis in Europe, the fallout of all of that, the time that Britain needs to create these new strategies will potentially be detrimental for Europe in the immediate future. So that sounds quite bleak. But, in relation to, going back to the Australia-England, Australia-Britain partnership with relation to security and that sort of thing, do you think that Britain will also need to reevaluate its security capabilities with Australia, Canada, New Zealand, the US, the Five Eyes community? Do you think that they will be looking to strengthen those more further? Do you think they will be looking to other countries, perhaps, that we haven't talked about, to strengthen security capabilities and bilateral relations with them? What countries could they be looking to partner with to share intelligence information, if any? What do you think?
If I could give you an encapsulated answer, the UK government would pay me millions of pounds to actually give you that answer to government, because I think that's exactly what's going on right now. There's an enormous assessment of, once this has happened, where does it leave us? Who are our traditional partners? How do we reinforce to them that we're a credible security partner? That doesn't change completely by a result of this decision. The Five Eyes is still the core basis of the UK's defence and security partnerships. It will always be important. It's the kind of relationship that most countries just don't have with allies. That will be important. Is there a possibility to strengthen it? I think already the UK is always looking to strengthen that partnership. Will they be looking to new partners? They'll have to be frank, because they're now not part of that European Union framework. But again, the jury's out on all of these questions at the moment, because we simply don't know. It's almost the unimaginable has happened, so now we need to sit, reflect and reassess and understand where that takes us.
Sure. So I suppose the only conclusion to draw from this is that the uncertainty is certain, and the long-term benefits of this referendum remain to be seen, so I guess watch this space.